We're here for a special edition of the program called What's Going On. And we are elated. You won't believe this. We are elated that you're here. And we're going to start a new series for the next 5 weeks. We're going to do a different kind of program. And today we're going to start out with the first of what is going to be a 5-part history series as we try to go back into time, and this time to be able to use history to show how we arrived here, because the way it's being taught now, with all of the things they're saying about history, you really can't tell then if that is true what they're saying about the past. How did we get here today? How did this happen? How did we arrive here in all of this tyranny? Well, I want you to know it didn't just happen overnight, and this is no flash-by, drive-by situation. We've been moving in this direction for a long time. I think last week, maybe I didn't say it on the air, but I was watching a segment of Ayn Rand, and she had done an interview back in 1979 with Mike Wallace, and Mike Wallace had was really floundered by some of the things that Ayn Rand was saying, because it's such the thinking of Rand at that point, and we haven't caught up to it too much even today, all these years later. But at that time, it was very shocking, given where the country was philosophically, to hear someone talking out loud. I guess they were also surprised in '61 to hear Madeline Murray, Madeline Murray, I think her name was, the one that
the atheist
challenged the prayer in the school.
Yeah, Madeline Murray O'Hare. Yeah,
is that
Madeline
it was
Murray
O'Hare, wasn't it?
Yeah, Madeline Murray O'Hare. Yep.
Yeah, and so that was shocking too, because we were, kind of like in the Bible Belt. I know we say the South is, but we were like a Bible Belt country at that point. And these notions that was outside the box, with our having been trained inside the box. I mean, all of my learning was inside the box for the first 12 years. I was so starry-eyed when I came out of high school, I didn't know where I was. But Ayn Rand was interviewed in 1979. And let's see, Rand would have, she died in 1982. So this really was very close to the end of her life, because Rand was born in 1905, and this great philosopher died in 82. And she was saying some things that were, Mike Wallace called it Randism, but she rejected that right on the air and told him that I don't accept that definition. And the definition she gave for it was objectivism. So I want to start a series, and it's going to be the next today and for the next 4 weeks, and we're going to be going back over some things that have to do with the history of this country that would be more in line with the sequencing of events that will help us to explain and understand how we have arrived at this moment, because we are now living in a country that don't have any rule of law, and the law is exactly what Alcee Hastings said. It is what they say it is. They're making it up as they go along, and it's really something when you have to defend yourself against that which you do, and then also go to court today and defend the things that you didn't do. And not only that, the things that you didn't do, that they know you didn't do, and they charge you anyway, and then fining you and denying you all kinds of processes that are guaranteed in the that are written in I can't say guaranteed, that are written in the Constitution of the United States, and it's supposed to be guaranteed by the document if it's the rule of law and the law of the land. But the law of the land today is not the Constitution. The law of the land is the Supreme Court. And that's what everybody is alluding to in terms of waiting to see what comes down. That got to come down to the serfs, come down to us from on high, where they're passing down their rules to us, and we're supposed to sit under the court, receiving it, regardless as to what the documents that govern the country have to say about it. And that's a very big problem for me in terms of my background. I have a tremendous objection to what is happening in this country today, because I know exactly what should be happening based upon the dynamics that are explained in our Constitution and the things they worked out of that convention. Having studied that extensively and knowing pretty much the arguments that were made at the Constitutional Convention, it's just very bothersome to hear people that do not understand the labor that went into the writing of the document and the level of argumentation that went on. These people are not in Congress. I'm talking about, they're not on this level of these framers, and I don't think they could understand much of what the framers actually came up with during that time period. What I thought I would do then in this series is start out at the very beginning, and I want to start out with methodically going down the line with the Declaration of Independence, because that is where the founding of the country will start. It starts in this time period. It does not start in 1619. And all those persons about the 1619 project, you can just get off that right now, because in 1619, these were British colonies, starting in 1607 with the founding of Jamestown in that year. And the 13 colonies had not broken away yet. What we're going to do here is start with the time period when the United States is now breaking from underneath the umbrella of the British Empire that's now budgeting and has been developing ever since the defeat of the Spanish Armada in 1588. And from that point, becoming the mistress of the seas, and you're seeing the empire beginning to develop at that point, the overseas colonies and so on, springing from that. I wanted to go back to July the 4th, 1776, because that is the day in which the great Thomas Jefferson was appointed to a commission of 5 members, and they had delegated some of the revolutionaries that were known at this point, the Adams family, for example, and they had appointed a committee of 5 persons to write a document that would declare their intention, after going through what they thought was enough time for the British government to correct what they felt were injustices and oppressive conditions that had been laid upon the colonists. And they gotten to a point after a long train of grievances that the time had come to announce the separation from Great Britain, the budgeting at this point, Great Britain. And so Thomas Jefferson, being one of the 5 members of that committee that had been assigned to write the document, to draft the document, because it got to now be submitted to the Continental Congress. And they have 5 members on the committee. And of those 5 members, in meeting to do the task that's been assigned to them, Adams recognized, as the others did, that the one that was among them that had the scholarship to do the job that had been tasked of this committee, assigned it within the committee itself, assigned it to Thomas Jefferson. And at this point, Adams and Jefferson are very much on the same terms. Both of them are revolutionaries out having the same idea of what needs to be done now that they've had the grievances known and the grievances have not been met. And they've now declared there's something yet to be done about it because they've been complaining about this. This goes back into the 1760s. I think you could say that the British were being aware of the grievances inside the colonies as early as 1763, 1764, in that time period. And when I read the document to you, and they're saying a long train of grievances, they're saying then they didn't just start on July the 4th, the date in which they date the Declaration of Independence. They're saying that there's a long train of abuses they've allowed, that they've shown that they are filling in the colonies and telling the king in England about their grievances, and nothing has been done about it. And after all these years have passed, they have now thrown down the gauntlet. And this has gotten to the point now where they're involved in what would be, if they were not victorious, they're now engaged in treason. This is a treasonous document. And the Declaration of Independence, which would be ratified on July the 4th, but was submitted to the Continental Congress on the 2nd of July, as they are considering it, and they're taking some parts of it out and they're refining it and getting something they can all agree on. At the end of the day, 56 persons signed it. And really, you have to keep in mind here, this is really a death warrant that they signed. If they had lost, this is why Franklin will say that we must, after they signed it, we must all hang together. Because we don't hang together, we most surely will hang separately. That's the stakes. And so I want to read the document and go through it, because you just can't say that the grievance was taxation without representation. Not when they list in this document 27 grievances. And I'm going to read each one and pause when I think we need to have some explanation of what they're doing here. But there are 27 grievances that are listed in the Declaration. And you'll see the methodical listing of where they felt that they had given time for the accent of King George III, and it had not been forthcoming. And now they're getting ready to tell the world that this is why. And you'll see where Thomas Jefferson is saying that a respect for the world opinion, a respect for the opinion of mankind, they need to understand why this is going on here. Because the other side of that coin is that other countries around the world, France, Portugal, Spain, they have colonists also. And if you are raising a revolutionary sentiment in the world, then there are some problems it may present for other colonial powers, and you need to calm the tensions down, because they're going to feel some problems with the revolution, and there might come a time when you might need some assistance in what you are preparing to do. And they will need France, without which this would not have been, I don't think this could have been successful without Lafayette and the French and the colonists they brought on the shores of the United States to fight this battle from Haiti, which would be the next colony in the Western Hemisphere to rise up, because the ones that are in Haiti are fighting along with Lafayette, because Haiti is a colony of France. And so this is a reverberating problem, and there's a lot of concern it could raise, given the fact that it's not the only colonial presence in the Western Hemisphere, because the Western Hemisphere has a number of actors in it, and there are colonies that they have in their possessions as well. See, don't forget here that we have the division of the country I should say the division of the Western Hemisphere, and at the conference of let's see, that year for, I'm talking here about the conference where they divided the world, where the Pope got in between Spain and Portugal, and got between them because they were two warring nations. Both of them are Catholic nations at this point. We don't have Martin Luther yet until 1517. So the Pope, not wanting to see two warring nations, both of them under the umbrella of the Catholic Church, and also having this problem with the Muslim world that is creating a problem for Christendom. You don't want to have this division going on. So the Pope stands there at the Treaty of, and has the Treaty of Tordesillas, it was called, to be signed between the two parties, where he gave so much of the land in dispute to the Portuguese, and that would be up to the 35-degree longitude, and on the other side of that would be the on this side would be the Portuguese, on the other side would be the Spanish, and the line of demarcation by the Treaty of Tordesillas would be to divide that part of the world up between these two Catholic, countries. There's no Protestant at this point. So you see the growing influence, and what Jefferson is doing here is Jefferson is writing and you can tell by what he wrote that he has in mind not to stir the pot up so that he's creating more problems than just what is necessary for the colonists to then make their presence known and make their independence movement known. They're not trying to stir up a revolution among all of the European powers that have stakes in the Western Hemisphere, because they're here too. And Jefferson is seeking to calm that down. You'll hear this in this document. Here's what Jefferson wrote. When in the course of human events, it becomes necessary for one people to dissolve the political bonds which have connected them with another, and to assume among the powers of the earth the separate and equal station in which the laws of nature and of nature's God entitle them. A decent respect to the opinions of mankind requires that they should declare the causes which impel them to the separation. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain inalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, that to secure these rights, governments are instituted among men. These rights, governments are instituted among men, deriving their just powers from the consent of the governed. That whenever any form of government becomes destructive of these ends, it is the right of the people to alter or to abolish, and to institute new government, laying its foundations on such principles and organizing its powers in such form as to them shall seem most likely to affect their safety and happiness. Prudence, indeed, will dictate that government long established should not be changed for light and transient reasons. And accordingly, all experience have shown that mankind are more disposed to suffer while evils are sufferable than to strike out themselves by abolishing the forms to which they are accustomed. But when a long train of abuses and usurpations, pursuing invariably the same object, evinces a design to reduce them under absolute depression and despotism, pursuing invariably the same object, it is their right, it is their duty to throw off such government and to provide new guards for their further security. Such has been the patient suffering of these colonies, and such is now the necessity which constrained them to alter their former system of government. The history of the present King of Great Britain is a history of repeated injuries and usurpations, all having in direct object the establishment of an absolute tyranny never before seen. To prove this, let facts be submitted to a, listen to this part, to a candid world. And then they list the 27 grievances. I don't think it's until somewhere around number 17 or so they get to anything about the grievance about taxation. Here's the top of the list. He has refused his assent of laws, the most wholesome and necessary for the public good. He has forbidden his governors to pass laws of immediate and pressing importance, unless suspended in their operation, and I'll explain this part, till his assent should be obtained, and when so suspended, he is utterly neglected to attend to them. And what Jefferson is writing here is that they want to, first of all, any laws that you are, in fact, that you passed that did not have the assent of the king, but necessary for the harmony and happiness of those in the colonies, the king wants to suspend those laws at the same time as suspending them, not taking care to put other laws in their place that will affect the happiness and the security of the colonists. So that's the first group as they put down in the Declaration. He has refused to pass other laws for the accommodation of larger districts of people unless those people will relinquish the right of representation in the legislatures, in their local legislatures, a right inestimable to them and formidable to tyranny only. In other words, who would object to it unless they have a tyrannical intent? Because the people need laws in order to govern themselves, and to take those laws and suspend them and then not put laws in their place, it in fact takes the umbrella of protection away from the people, and that's also objectionable. Number 2 on the list of their objections. He has called together legislative bodies at places unusual, uncomfortable, and distant from the depository of the public records, for the sole purpose, listen carefully to this part, of fatiguing them into compliance with the measures. By the time they get there, they're too tired to object. He has dissolved representative houses repeatedly for opposing with manly firmness his invasion of the rights of the people. He has refused for a long time after such dissolution to cause others to be elected, whereby the legislatures incapable of annihilation, have returned to the people at large for their exercise. In other words, just because you have placed the bodies in exile, you cannot annihilate the legislators, because the people have the rules that they want to be governed by inside of their own idea of what ought to be the governing document of the country. You can suspend it, but he says here that is incapable, those accents that they've agreed to on paper cannot be annihilated. You have to have something to put in their place. And the objection is that they have taken away from them the laws that they had assented to and put nothing in their place, and then left them without the umbrella protection. That's a problem. And they've asked for it to be corrected. It's not been corrected. He has endowed, after having said that, he has endeavored to prevent the population of these states for the purpose of obstructing the laws for naturalization of foreigners, refusing to pass others to encourage their migration hither, and raising the conditions of new appropriations of land, because you're bringing people in without any accent on the part of those who are here, and it's causing problems and so on. And that's objected to as well by the people that have arrived. You see, you can't just. This is what we're doing now, and that's also objectionable today. The same way, same kind of objection going on here with what Biden is doing. He has endeavored to prevent the population of these states for that purpose, obstructing the laws for naturalization of foreigners, refusing to pass others to encourage their migration hither, and raising the conditions of new appropriations of lands. He has obstructed the administration of justice by refusing his assent to laws for establishing judiciary powers. He has made judges dependent on his will alone for the tenure of their offices and the amount and payment of their salaries. He has erected a multitude of new offices and sent hither swarms of officers to harass our people and eat of their substance. That has to do with something he'll write later in the document about the quartering of troops and the eating of their substance, meaning that they're at your dinner table. Okay, you'll get to that when we get to the Constitution. We'll see that objection to quartering of troops is written in the document that they created. They have a major objection here. He is kept among us in times of peace, standing armies, without the consent of our legislatures. He has affected to render the military independent of and superior to the civil power. They'll rectify that later, as you will see, by putting the president over the armed services and making him the commander-in-chief. He has combined with others to subject us in a jurisdiction foreign to our Constitution and unacknowledged by our laws, giving his assent to their acts of pretended legislation, for quartering large bodies of armed troops among us and their homes, for protecting them by a mock trial from punishment for any murders which they should commit on the inhabitants of these states, for cutting off our trade with all parts of the world, for imposing taxes on us without our consent, Now, how far down the list is that? The taxation is definitely a problem. But you notice the way they listed below all those things I read. Now they bring in the taxation issue. So to say that the objection is singular to taxation without representation, you can see here that that has no credence based upon what Jefferson is writing in the document. And don't forget that they've crossed out certain parts of the document. So the signatures, and there are 56 of them, that will give their name to it. They have agreed that these are the grievances that they can, in fact, sign on to, and the order in which they are, in fact, listed, they've agreed to that. Now, here's one: for depriving us, in many cases, of the benefits of trial by jury. That is Donald Trump's situation. Didn't have a jury. For transporting us beyond seas to be tried for pretended offenses. For abolishing the free system of English laws in a neighboring province, and listen to this part here, establishing therein an arbitrary government and enlarging its boundaries so as to render it at once as an example and its instruments for introducing the same absolute rule into these colonies. In other words, setting up another province and using that as an example and as a model for coming into the 13 colonies and trying to impose that, the king's will, inside of the 13 colonies. They found that objectionable. You can see the temperature is increasing. For suspending our own legislatures and declaring themselves invested with power to legislate for us in all cases whatsoever. He has abdicated government here by declaring us out of his protection and waging war against us. He has plundered our seas, ravished our coasts, burnt our towns, and destroyed the lives of our people. This fighting that's going on, March the 5th, 1770, what was called and erroneously called that, but you can see how they exaggerated the grievances in some cases, the so-called Boston Massacre on March 5th, 1770 that occurred. He has abdicated government here by declaring us out of his protection and waging war against us. He has plundered our seas, ravaged our coasts, burned our towns, and destroyed the lives of our people. He is at this time transporting large armies of foreign mercenaries to complete the works of death, desolation, and tyranny, already begun with circumstances of cruelty and perfidy scarcely paralleled in the most barbarous ages, and totally unworthy the head of a civilized nation. He has constrained our fellow citizens, taken captive on the high seas, to bear arms against their country. That's to say that colonists are being impressed into the British Army to become part of the oppressors that are being sent against their own countrymen. And so they say here, he has constrained our fellow citizens, taken captive on the high seas to bear arms against their country, to become the executioners of their friends and brethren, or to fall themselves by their hands. They got the colonists shooting at each other. That's what they're saying. He has excited domestic insurrection amongst us and has endeavored to bring on the inhabitants of our frontiers the merciless Indian savages whose known rule of warfare is an indistinguished destruction of all ages, sexes, and conditions. Sicking the Native Americans on the colonists. In every stage of these oppressions, we have petitioned for redress of grievances in the most humble terms. Petition of grievances in the First Amendment of the Constitution of the United States. Oppressions, we have petitioned for redress of the most humble in the most humble terms. Our repeated petitions have been answered only by repeated injury. In other words, you complaining, here's some more. A prince whose character is thus marked by every act which may define a tyrant is unfit to be the ruler of a free people. They've already made up their mind. They're now talking about a free people. We're going to get to the end of it, but you can see where this is going. Nor have we been wanting in attention to our British brethren. We've been complaining and complaining is what they're saying, and nothing has been done about our grievances, about our complaints. You see, the time has come now where they're not going to complain anymore. We have warned them from time to time of attempts by their legislature to extend an unwaverable and warrantable jurisdiction over us. Immigration and settlement here. We've appealed to their native justice and magnanimity, and we have conjured them by the ties of our common kindred to disavow these usurpations, which would inevitably interrupt our connections and correspondence. They too have been deaf to the voice of justice and consequently, let me get my teeth in, right? Consequentity. We must therefore acquiesce in the necessity which denounces our separation and hold them as we hold the rest of mankind, enemies in war and friends in peace. They're ready to go to war over this. They know the war is likely to follow this declaration. And so they end it this way. We therefore, the representatives of the United States of America, in General Congress assembled, appealing to the Supreme Judge of the world for the rectitude of our intentions, do in the name and by authority of the good people of these colonies, solemnly publish and declare that these united colonies are and of right ought to be free and independent states, that they are absorbed from all allegiance to the British Crown, and that all political connections between them and the state of Great Britain is and ought to be totally dissolved, and that as free and independent states, they have full power to levy war, conclude peace, contract alliances, establish commerce, and to do all other acts and things which independent states may of right do. And for the support of this declaration with a firm reliance on the protection of divine providence, we mutually pledge to each other our lives, our fortunes, and our sacred honor. And below that, death warrant, which is what this amounts to. 56 people, all the ones who were there, signed it. And Benjamin Franklin, the elder statesman, this man, this is what really is amazing about it. The elder statesman at that convention, because this is a lot of these persons are very these are young people, pretty much. You have Franklin's son is 47 years old, and they're going to fall out over this, by the way. But there's going to be a lot of problems with this between Benjamin Franklin and his son. His son didn't see it the same way that Franklin saw it, but Benjamin Franklin saw it. But Benjamin Franklin is telling them, as the elder statesman, to understand the gravity of what we've done here. They knew the stakes. And you have to have a certain respect for the framers. I have a tremendous amount of respect for the framers because I know that this took a lot of courage. This statement here at the end that says, we mutually pledge to each other our lives, our fortunes, and our sacred honor. A time when your word meant something. And these signatories to this document, some signed it, and one of the persons that signed it, James Monroe, was a little bit more serious about it than was John Adams. And Monroe became the 5th president of the United States. I would say he was more serious about it than John Adams. So you can start out a certain way and falter along the way. I think that there was a different commitment with Adams than there was with James Monroe. Monroe was carrying out the intricacies of the Declaration when he was the 5th president of the United States. The era of good feelings during this time period, and there was such a fervor for the things he was doing in the name of the revolutionary sentiment that he was, in fact, going to be unanimously elected by the Electoral College, as had been the case with George Washington. But there was one elected that felt that they should not do that for James Monroe, although there was an era of good feeling in the country at that time because the revolutionary sentiment had not died out yet. And those revolutionaries were still here. And Monroe was a true custodian of the revolutionary sentiments. And they saw that during his administration. They had some problems with Adams. Jefferson and James Madison had some problems with Adams. And we're going to be talking next week about what happened as a result of that fallout. Because Adams was doing things that they knew was not what was in accord with what they'd agreed to at that convention in 1776. In that spirit of 76, I would put it as having live for one generation, quite frankly, because I think that in the aftermath, I would date the revolution being pretty much a sounding board for the nation, pretty much some evidence that there was some of the concrete, the mortar coming loose at the seams. There was some evidence of that, but enough of it was still in place by the time that Monroe was the president. But you could see some cracks beginning to develop, and I would put the mortar in the revolutionary sentiment of the country in a single generation. This is my dating of it. I think we can say without any full-throated objection to this, that the revolutionary sentiment in the country lasted for a generation, a 20-year period. And I would put it from 1776 until the last year of George Washington's last full year of George Washington's administration. Washington will stand down from power and not run again in 1796, and will leave the White House in 1797. In that 20-year period from 1776, which would go through the Articles of Confederation and the ratification of that in 1781, that 20-year period from 1776 to 1796, I would say that would be the 20-year period in which the country was, in fact, still relentlessly pursuing something that had never been pursued before in the history of the world. A free people where the leaders would be tethered to a constitutional document that tied its power down under the claim that the people were sovereign and they only were able to act in the people's name by the carrying out of the relinquishing of the sovereignty in the delegation of power away from the people through the states through the 13 states. The world is paying attention to this because they were looking. You could almost see the world looking with their mouth open because they had never seen this and didn't know what it was they were looking at. They certainly didn't know what they were looking at with George Washington having stepped down from power on 2 different occasions. They were aghast at that. Didn't understand it. They'd never seen it before. A person riding in the aftermath of having been the pivotal leader that led the nation against another nation and came out victorious in going up against the power of the British Empire. And after having rendered the British Empire to get back off of the colonists, went back home. They were saying things about George Washington around the world because they were looking there starry-eyed. They could not believe a person would do that. And who had done it before? There's no record of it. You can say what you want to about great presidents. I know what I say about it. And I'm the only one saying it because I don't think you can put anyone up there on Mount Rushmore based upon the history of the country and put anyone up there on the same side of that mountain as George Washington. I think you have to put George Washington by himself because he stands singly alone in terms of what this man did to get this country off the ground and get it running. And he's the only one of all the presidents we've had. And we claim to have now the 46th president. We've had 45 because there were 2 presidents that were presidents in non-consecutive terms. We had 1 president in non-consecutive terms, so he was president twice. I don't think you can logically put, this is me speaking, I'm not speaking from the text of any of these other writers. I've written a book on this as well. I'm trying to, I'm going to go back and do a revision. I think it's worth the while. I got to go back and I got to dig it out and work on it some more. I realized some of the things I did in error that I should not have done. I made some, well, I won't revisit it here, but I did some things that I now see were not commercially advantageous. And I can see more clearly now some things I could have said differently that would not have been so I don't think controversial, but so unpalatable to the status quo. I do think, though, that it will stand that George Washington has no peers among the presidents we've had in this country. There should be none that compare with him, and Abraham Lincoln should not even be in the same sentence with George Washington's name. We'll get to that when we get to, I think the fourth segment of would be, I'm going to be doing I think the fourth segment is on the so-called Civil War, and I'll be changing some of the definitions there as well. That's the Declaration of Independence, and it is now ready to be submitted to the Continental Congress. They are going to do some revision of it because some of the things that are complaints there, the colonists have taken on some of the things that the British were doing, and the practice has now taken hold in the colonies, some of it, and they have to modify it because there are some objections to it by those who, for example, are importing slaves into the country, and to have that as an accusation against King George III, and then have 19 slave owners ratifying the document. To get them to come into the document, you got to modify some of the language in the document in order to capture their attention and their support in signing the document. Now, a lot of persons have a problem with that, but I have to tell you this as well. Those 19 slave owners that signed this document wrote, "All men are created equal." And rather than focusing on the other aspect of it as an inheritance, you need to look a little bit more beyond that to see who knew they had a contradiction in the land space. And then what they decided to do about it as they began to work out how they were going to deal with this American dilemma. It's later written about in 1948 by the Swedish sociologists that came in here to study this experiment, 1944. And wrote a 2-volume work about it called The American Dilemma. It was a dilemma, and the framers recognized it as such. But they also recognized that all of the work that they were doing to put this together, it was not seamless. There were certain quirks in the process of bringing 13 constituents together that had some common interests and some different interests. And to knit it all together, how do you do that without creating the friction? Because the interests are not 100% congruent. There are some that have slaves and some that don't. There's the interest there. There are some that are exporting states and some are importing states. The northern states are more or less importing states. The southern states are the ones that are exporting. And that circular trade is going to create a problem later on when they declare their independence. So they have to worry about how to maintain a unity that's very tenuous at the edges. Centrally, there's tremendous unity. They've all avowed that the British have got to get off their back. They all that's 100% agreement. There are certain things that are inside of the agreement, though, they have to continue to be worked out and not worked out at this point that they're signing this document. But you see where they're going with it, though, by them declaring all men are created equal. And if you look at that carefully, you'll see where they intend to take this. But you can't do this overnight. This has to be worked out in time. And they are going to incrementally move toward what they have agreed to in stating all men are created equal, and they are going to work it out incrementally, would be the idea. That's what the idea is at that convention. Let me then go to what they came up with as a governing document, because they've accused King George III of taking away from them that which they had put in place of their own legislative body, that which he had not assented to, but he took it away from them and did not put anything in their place. So here's what they put in the place of the document they had, that King George III had taken from them. This is it's a very flawed document. We didn't just get from that to the more perfect union we talked about later on. We got there by going through some things through trial and error, and we made some mistakes in it in terms of being so fearful of central power being concentrated that we in fact tried to tie the power down to the point where it could not in fact act. And you see this in this document here called the Articles of Confederation. Agreed to by the Congress November the 15th, 1777, ratified and in force March 1st, 1781. So 4 years in the ratification process. Let me see what part of that I want to read. I don't want to read the whole document. I just want to read the parts that are germane to what they're doing here. Listen to this part here. This is Article 2. There are 13 articles in the Articles of Confederation, 13 articles. Each state retains its sovereignty, retains its freedom and independence, and every power, jurisdiction, and right, which is not by this Confederation, expressly delegated to the United States in Congress assembled. Okay, so these are states that have declared their independence, but inside of the independence that's been declared, they are now further stating they are independent politics inside of the independent movement they've established. I want you to think about that, because we're going to see some problems with that later on in terms of the secession movement that we're going to be coming to later on in, I think, the fourth segment we have planned for this series. But we now have a document put in its place in all of its flaws, and in next week, what we're going to be doing here is going to point out what the flaws were and why this then has to be rectified at another convention being called, and that convention is going to be called in order to go to a convention in Philadelphia, go back to Philadelphia. That's where they were when they had the Declaration of Independence, ratified, if you want to say that, really certified by the 5th or 6th signatories that signed the document and submitted it to the Continental Congress. They're going back there later on to amend, the idea was to amend the Articles of Confederation, which when we get to next week, we'll talk about what happened there, because they did not amend the document. They created another document. And they're continuing to refine it and think about it and put it together. And it took them almost 3 months to do that part, which is the next segment of this, and we'll get to that next segment next week. Okay, until next week, I want you to follow your dream. If you don't follow your dream, you'll never know what's on the other side of the rainbow.